Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. My name is Chris the High Guy Jacobs, and today we take a look at part 2 of our 5-part series, taking a look at the legendary heroes available in my favorite game, Doomsday Last Survivors. Now, in episode 1, we took a look at the infantry heroes only and paired them with infantry heroes only. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the ranged heroes available and pair them with their ranged counterparts. I will also show you how I rank them individually based on the number that I show them at. Okay, so the first hero I go through is what I think is the top of the line hero in this game, or in that, ranged heroes category. That being said, let's jump right in, guys, because as I know, there are a lot of heroes to go through and a lot of information to read. So, first and foremost, who do I think is the strongest currently as of today's date, being June 7th of 2024? The current top ranged hero in the game right now, I would have to say, goes to our friend Julia. She did receive a nerf recently into her awakening skill in regards to her silence, but the truth is that doesn't take away her benefits of being at the top. She's got a great damaging ability, 12,500 point damage to one target, and immediately restores 100 rage of her own. She has the capability to increase range squad attacks and range squad defense. She has the capability to reduce damage taken from basic attacks. When rage is more than 90%, increases skill damage. And of course, she increases range squad HP by 12%, also making them a 20% chance to being immune to taking increased damage. So she has a ton of utility. She can be used in a ton of different lines. She's not limited by Garrison or Siege. She can be used many places, and when you awaken her, she all of a sudden now gets a silence on her ability. Okay? So this means that not only is she dealing 13,750 damage, regenerating a ridiculous amount of rage very quickly, and silencing the enemy for 3 seconds, it is a massive hindrance when you're fighting in the field, or when you're fighting pretty much anywhere. Even if she's running co-lead on a siege, silencing out a heal, silencing out a shield ability becomes very, very potent. And with her ability to generate rage very quickly, and her rage skill only costs 1,000, this gives her a ton of utility in the game. If you look at the talent trees and how you're going to level those up, it's going to look a little something like this. Remember, we're currently in a meta where the biggest important factor is how much damage your skills do. How often you can put out those skills, and effectively how much sustain you can have from them. So we want to make sure that we go ahead and do as much we can to generate as much rage as we can, which allows her to trigger her skills, and then support whatever we have left into the range squad side of things. Remember, there's a strategy button. It will give you kind of what to do, and as you can see, this is kind of the same thing that I'm telling you. My only difference is I'm not a big fan of this ability. The double-edged sword, I'm not a big fan of going down that avenue. The 1.5% attack and the bonus damage you take here and bonus damage you deal just doesn't make it worth it. Remember, ranged heroes or ranged troops are already at a disadvantage. They already take more damage, which means you don't want to make them more glass cannon-like, okay? So in my opinion, take away from the double-edged sword, put that more in, you'd be more beneficial to put that directly into your ranged squad talent tree instead. Okay? Now, who is Julia going to pair up with? Well, the truth is, the reason why Julia is so good is because of the fact that not only does she have a silence, not only does her damage skill do a lot of damage, and she provides a ton of rage regeneration, but she can be used on so many different lines, and her utility is insane. For example, someone's donating some stuff to me. Very nice. Oh, Almo, you know you don't have to pay me to stay in the Alliance. I think he thinks he has to donate to stay in the Alliance. Anyway, so where is she best? Who does she best played with? Well, the truth is, Julia is going to be a co-lead. She's going to co-lead any line you want to put her in. If you want to fight her in the field with Lynn, you have her co-lead with Lynn, you've got a really dominant line. You want to fight her in a siege, for example, you can fight her with Bard. You want to put her in a Garrison line, you can fight her with Lewis. You want to put her in another fighting line, you can fight her with Chun. She's got so much utility with where you want to put her. There's the reason why she is ranked the way that she is. Okay, so what do we have? Rank 1 Julia. Perfect. Next, let's look at our number 2 ranking in the list. Right? Number 2 that we're looking at today, our good friend, Lewis. Lewis is another one of those characters who does a good amount of damage, right? He does 10,000 damage up to 5 different squads. Damage taken by each enemy squad reduces by 15%. So he basically has a huge AoE punch, right? Restricts, it reduces based on how many people you hit, which is fine. Increases skill damage by an extra 30%, which is huge. He increases range squad by an extra 30%, squad attack which is pretty good. And he automatically generates a ton more rage just by using basic attacks. So he's really good in a lot of different places. Once you level him up and you awaken him, all of a sudden his damage becomes so much more potent. An extra 20% added to his damage factor. Okay? So where does he work and what does he do? Well, again, his skill tree is going to be about the same. Most of your points go into the skill avenue side of things. The rest go into your ranged heroes or the ranged squad side of things. Some people might put him in Garrison if they plan to only use him in Garrison. But again, he's got a lot of utility. He has a ton of capabilities being used in a plethora of different places. If you think about it, the only benefit he gets from Garrison is this secondary part to the skill, increasing the HP of ranged squads when garrisoning. Okay, but other than that, he can be used in any avenue and still have a ton of capabilities. So for example, if you want a good line to fight in the field, Lewis and Julia, great line. Lynn and Lewis, great line. If you want to have him running Garrison with ranged only, you have him run co-lead with Jacob. If you want to have him running sieges, you have him running with Bard or Johnny. He's got a ton of utility that we want to be useful for, which is exactly why I have him ranked as high as he is. Okay? So number 1, number 2, you're looking at Julia and Lewis. Next, number 3, we have a new ringer to the list. Her name is Lynn. Now, Lynn is an offensive character who excels when fighting in the field. Okay? If we look at her skills here, we're talking dealing damage of 11,700. If she's flanked when not rallying or garrisoned, so if she's not in a rally or garrisoned or on defense, she deals additional damage to the current target. So this is what I'm saying. She benefits from fighting in the field among groups of people. She is one you want to use, not just individually fighting farmers or things like that, but you're going to use her in big war. Okay? That's where she's going to excel. Next, she has the capabilities of increasing the range squad attack by, again, 30%. That's great. If flanked when not rallying or garrisoned, again, in field battle, increases that range squad defense by 15%. Okay? Next, we have the capability of her increasing the range squad HP by 34% at max level. Counterattacks having a 20% chance to reduce all damage taken by 4.5%. I mean, that's a pretty good value by itself for all damage taken once every 4 seconds. And then lastly, she increases that travel speed by up to 20% while increasing counter damage by 32%. So she becomes very, very efficient. And like she said, she shines when fighting in the field in typically large groups. And then her passive skill at the end, once you awaken her when in world map battles, like I said, big war fights, increases range squad damage by 3%. And reduces damage taken by 10. This is kind of exactly what ranged needs. More defense, and capabilities to fight in big groups. Because unfortunately, like we've talked about, ranged, they're typically the least, like they take the most amount of damage, right? So they're typically the ones that are leaving battle first, and she's going to help combat that by reducing that damage taken, by increasing the HP, by increasing the by reducing the damage that she takes overall, by making them tankier, and then obviously in big team fights doing more damage and having more benefit from that, specifically in big team fights. She's a brand new addition to the list. She is actually one of the newest characters. Her and Bard were just released, and she's already hunting really up there in regards to the rankings. Now, who would you suit her for? Well, let's first look at her talents. Again, guys, once you've seen one, you've seen them all. She's a skills hero. So you rank up that skills tree, start dropping the rest into the range squad. Get that rage generation, so that you're putting out more skills, and you kind of continue from there. Again, I'm not a big fan of double-edged sword. I don't use it. Feel free to use it if you want. But again, this is the best part about it. Once you understand how the talent trees work, it's the same for all of them. And it's much easier to decompartmentalize or to kind of separate what you want to do with your heroes based on what those talent trees are. Okay? So mostly into the skills, get that all done up so you're generating as much rage as possible, and then obviously counter the rest into range squads so that you're getting a decent amount from there. So you want to have the rest of that damage coming from there. So that's 1, 2, 3. Down to number 4, we're looking at my buddy Bard. Again, a brand new addition to the game, just recently added with Lynn in the last patch. And he's already making waves as one of the strongest, range squad leaders. Now, there's a couple of key reasons for this. Number one, if you look at his skills, he generates a ton of rage, okay? With his capability, if the skill kills an enemy squad, has a 50% chance to immediately recover up to 60 rage when fully done. He's also got one of the hardest hitting skills at 13,000. And he does that up to 3 targets in a circle. Okay? So it's a ton of damage that goes out in a full 360 AoE, which means that he's going to be really good when running rallies, right? Which is exactly what he does, right? He's a siege star. He runs on offense and he runs on siege, but he's really, really good at what he does. Generates a ton of rage with his skills. Increases range squad attack by 30%. If the enemy is inflicted with a silence, increases basic attack damage by an extra 21%. So you can start to see where you pair him with Julia, for example, who has that silence, makes it really good. You pair him with Chun, for example, who has a silence built in, well, that's going to start to work a little bit more better with his capabilities. Okay? Next, we have his Invincible Fleet. During sieges, increases range squad defense by 25% and HP by 25%. Those are both very potent buffs, but they only trigger during sieges, hence why he is typically the one that you're going to run your sieges with now that we have him unlocked. During rallies, again, those are your sieges, same thing, increases skill damage dealt to Garrison squad by 16%, but all damage taken by Garrison squad is increased by 4%. So he does make things a little bit more glass cannony by itself, but because he naturally is already making things tankier in doing what he does by increasing that defense and the HP, it balances out. Okay? So you're dealing an extra 54% skill damage, and you're only taking an extra 12.5. So it balances out to work really well. And then when you look at what happens when you have him unlocked, you're talking 14,000 damage factor on his attack. You're able to reduce, obviously, 15% for each additional target, yada, yada. If the skill kills an enemy squad, has a 50% chance to immediately recover 65 rage and increase its own attack by 30%. So he's also got one of the better awakening buffs that you get. Additional rage, a huge attack buff, and a decent amount to the additional damage. So you can start to see why he ranks so well where he does. Now, this does obviously mean he's a little bit different. For someone like him, because he is a defensive character that the range needs, you're going to run him one of two ways. You're either going to level him in the defense side of things and then into range, like we've got here, something along those lines. Or you might do a little bit of defense, a little bit of siege, and a little bit of ranged squad. In my opinion, he's going to be much more effective by going more into this type of design and ignoring the siege part. Remember, the problem with those siege talent trees is that they're only beneficial when you are actually sieging. If you're rallying, I mean, if you're rallying a hive mind, for example, that doesn't count. You see what I'm saying? So he doesn't get the benefits. And if you're rallying a hive mind and that rally gets attacked during IR or AR or something like that, well, you're not getting those extra benefits of those buffs. So you're always going to be better to put it into defense or ranged, into those talent trees to get those passive buffs statically all the time. Or those passively all the time, pardon me. Okay? Now, once we talk about the skills and the talents, it comes down to who he works well with. And truth be told, because of what he does, it gives him kind of the same options. You're going to run him with Julia, because she runs everywhere. You're going to run him with Johnny, who's also a siege character, which I'll go through shortly. Or you're going to run him with Lewis, because Lewis generates a ton of skill, generates a ton of rage, puts out a ton of damage, AoE tons of damage. You see how there's a lot of utility within these heroes. But his main thing is to lead those sieges. You're going to be running him leading big rallies. And typically you'll run him with someone like Julia, Lewis, Johnny, something along those lines. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about number 5 on the list. Good old Johnny Carey the Jester. Now, Johnny Carey has a very specific role, which, again, he does really well. But he's a little bit differently, and this is kind of why he ranks a little bit lower on the list. Okay? Right now, the meta of this game is based on skills. And if you'll notice, Johnny Carey does not have the skills talent tree. He's got the attack talent tree. Now, this is what I think the meta is starting to turn more into. They're trying to balance the skills with basic attack. But because Julia is so strong, because Lewis is so strong, because even things like Adut and Miyamoto are so strong, we're currently still in a very skill-based meta. Okay? Which is why he ranks a little bit lower. Because unfortunately, most of his damage comes from basic attacks. Not nearly as much as you get from his rage skills. For example, he's only doing 12,000 compared to 13 or 14,000 coming from some of the other ones. However, he does reduce that target healing effect by up to 40%. And with someone like Thunder having such a potent heal, it becomes detrimental to those defensive lines to have that healing effect hindered so much. Okay. Next, his next skill, when outside Alliance territory, increases ranged squad attack by 9% and defense by 3%. So this means when you are outside of your own territory, okay? This is why he does well with sieging, when he's attacking other people's watchtowers or forts or shelters or anything like that, when you're going to be fighting outside of your own territory, okay? So you're not going to be rallying with him, for example, trying to rally an additional rally that's taking on your tower inside your area. You're going to send them on a siege targeting their tower or targeting their players or what have you outside of your area, okay? Because when you look at it, again, squad attack 30%, defense 10%, a little bit less potent on the buffs, which is also why he ranks a little bit lower. Okay, increasing skill damage by 3.5% every second up to 38.5%. So if you take that all into account, it makes it for a ridiculous amount of damage. Granted, though, after an assistant unleashes a rage skill, the buff will reset and stack again. Basically, the problem here is that you're never going to really see it ramped up all the way, because that typically takes 11 seconds, and you're going to be having skills go off more often than that. So one of the negative sides to that is that you're never going to really see that as a sustained buff for very long. So you kind of have to be a little bit wary of who you have him paired with for that. Again, he's got a second ability that only works really well when he's either sieging or outside the area. Basic attacks have a 20% chance to deal an additional 3,120 damage. So you can see how his whole focus is to not necessarily pump out skills as often, but in reality do more basic attacks than anything. So you would pair him with someone like Bard, for example, when he's sieging. You could pair him with someone like Chun, for example, who has a large... or a more expensive rage skill, which means that you're going to be using skills less often, right? So then technically you're going to have that balance with doing more basic attack damage, right? So you have those ways of kind of working around it. Again, the reason why he ranks 5th on the list is really just because of the fact that he's out of the meta right now. The meta is skills based, and what he focuses on is basic attacks. So that doesn't mean he's not useful. You can still use him as a co-lead for Bard when Bard's leading those big sieges. Totally great. You could have him leading and have Julia as a co-lead. Though again, you're not going to get that bonus damage happening very often, or at least to the max. But you will have you'll have it spooling fairly quickly. Or obviously someone like Lewis who's just got a lot of utility for what he does. Okay, I did mention Chun because she's got a more expensive rage skill. So you can run Chun with Johnny Carey as the co-lead. That's totally fine too, which would give you a little bit more capabilities hitting with the serial killer buff. But that also, I mean, you have to balance that with doing less skill damage because you're doing, effectively 20% less activations, right? Okay, so that's 5 down. We've got a couple left to go. Let's look at number 6 on the list today. We have Jacob. Now, Jacob is an interesting story because he used to be one of the key, in fact, the only key defensive player on the ranged squad. So he had his position really heavily in Garrison and defense. But now that we have Bard who does decently well on defense as well, Jacob kind of finds himself falling a little bit in the list. Especially when we start to talk about mix and match pairings in regards to things like Garrison, who's your best Garrison mix and match. Unfortunately, Jacob kind of falls out of that. Now, again, that doesn't mean he's not effective. If we look through his skills, for example, you've got an AoE damage of 12,500 in a fan-shaped area, increase his own counter damage by 23%, and then obviously the normal reduction for every enemy target that it hits. So already he's doing a decent amount of damage up front and then increasing that counter damage, which obviously makes him more efficient. Increases ranged squad HP by 6% and increases all damage dealt by 2.5%. So that's 20% and 7.5% only when Garrison. So this skill only is triggered when he's garrisoning. Deals damage up to 3 nearby enemy squads every 8 seconds. If garrisoning, also reduces the attack of these squads by 6%. So this is another one of those area of effects. So he'll do really well in group battles, right? But this is, again, another situation where he really shines when he's Garrison as a co-lead or something like that to your other Garrison heroes. Okay, or even as your main, if you're running straight ranged, having him as your main Garrison leader is a good choice too. You look at this last skill, Son of the Wind, increases all damage by 16% if the remaining squad size is below 50%. Increases all damage to 20% if the remaining squad size is less than 30%. So increases all damage by 5.5% if by 16%, and then increases all damage to 20%. So basically from 16, so up to 20% if the remaining squad is less than 30%. So in my opinion, and what you'll see, flat damage buffs, so overall damage increases versus attack percentage is always going to be, not always, but like more often than not going to be more impactful. And up to 20% is a really good buff. So you can start to see how he gets stronger the less troops he has to lead with. He's going to really excel when he's Garrison because he gets those extra skills. And then finally, the buff that he gets to his bonus here is pretty good. He gets a nice chunk to his damage factor. He gets a decent additional 5% for his increasing counter damage. So it's not a bad boost to his awakening when he gets there. But unfortunately, like I mentioned, because the other defensive hero that you have is Bard, and Bard just kind of does the same type of stuff a little bit better, Jacob falls in the rankings just a little bit. Now, again, that doesn't mean he's not good. He can still be used in field battle, though, again, his skills do tailor for him being a Garrison hero. He would still do really well with someone like Lewis. If you're going to Garrison, or if you want to do someone in the field, you can do him with Julia, pardon me, to get more of those skills triggered off, or even someone like Lynn to add a little bit more of that defense and more of that fighting in the open field benefit that she likes to have. Okay, so you've got Jacob, good choice. When you look at the skills, like we mentioned, you're going to be looking at him and dealing with that defensive wing, and then the rest into range squad to give him as much bang for your buck as you can. Okay. Number 7 on the list. We are getting close, guys. Number 7, we are looking at Chun. Chun, number 7. Springs Zephyr. Now, a lot of people hate on Chun. I'm kind of hating on Chun a little bit too. Only because she's got a couple of things that don't necessarily work in her favor that we need to address real early. Okay? First off, her number 1 rage skill. Now, if we'll notice something here, her rage required for this is 1200. If we look at anyone else, more often than not, you're going to find the rage requirement at about 1000, which means that Chun is already at a disadvantage. She has to earn 20% more rage for her rage skill to trigger. Now, granted, she does have one of the hardest hitting rage skills in the game, okay? Because it's 12,000 damage to 2 enemies in a straight line. If only one enemy is hit, the damage is increased by 20%. So there's no reduction here, which means that she has effectively the strongest hitting rage skill in the rider side of things. Okay, it hits the hardest. If you think about it, 12,000 plus an additional 20% if you're only hitting one. So if you're only fighting one-on-one, you're doing, well, what's 20%? So that's an extra 25. That's almost 15,000 damage to the one character. If you're doing it to 2, they're both getting hit for 12,000 damage. There's no reduction. Okay? The only reduction, and the reason why she's, again, ranked so low, is that you have to use her as the leader of the march. If you don't, that damage gets cut in half. And all of a sudden, that rage skill is not nearly as beneficial for the cost of what it's going to cost to activate. Okay? So she has to lead in order for her to be the most effective. But that also brings you at a disadvantage because her rage required is more, which means that you have to generate more rage to use them. See how that works? Okay? Next, when taking skill damage, restores up to 100 rage instantly, and there is a 10% chance to inflict silence. So she's got a silence, which goes up to 50%. Right? Now, remember, we're talking about how Bard has that benefit when he works with someone with silence? Well, there you go. Okay? You have someone that provides a 50% chance at max rank, a 50% chance to trigger that silence. And automatically generates an additional 100 rage. So she generates rage, even though her rage costs more. She's going to generate that rage from taking skill damage, and have a 50% chance to inflict a silence. And trust me, a silence is pretty potent. Okay. Now she's got a when in battle increases squad HP by 6% and attack by 6%. At max is 20% and 20%. That's better than our 15. But still, we're talking about attack and HP. It's not damage or damage reduction, which is better. Okay? Next, when leading range squads only, increases skill damage by 7.5%, by 25% at max rank, and then increasing travel speed by 30%. That's a potent buff. Okay? But here becomes the problem. This is the reason why she, in my opinion, this is why she gets ranked, in my opinion, as low as she does. She's got a more expensive rage skill that takes more to come off. She has to be leading. And she really only likes to fight in the field. I mean, you can use her to do, like you can use her to siege and stuff like that, right? You could use her with someone like Bard to siege with. You could pair her with Johnny to run in the field, right? That wouldn't be a problem, even to siege there. But again, because of her hindrance of that rage skill, you really have to pair her with someone who's going to boost that rage generation. So you'd have to pair her as a Julia co-lead or a Lewis co-lead, for example, to make her really beneficial. Okay? So again, she's just ranked low because she doesn't have as much utility. You can really only use her beneficially by fighting in the field. She doesn't have the same utility as a lot of other the players, or characters, pardon me, which is unfortunately why she reaches rank 7 on the list. Now, who does that bring us up to? Well, finally, that brings us to Nakano Maya. Now, Nakano Maya is unfortunately ranked 8 on the list, and you'll see why. Again, it's not that she's bad, it's just that there are better options. There are heroes that do what she does, but simply do it better, okay? So let's go through her skills first. We'll take a look. Again, it's the same type of premise. Her first skill does damage and increases the squad attack by 24%. But this damage factor is only 8,000. Okay, so this becomes why she's not nearly as good. In a meta where most of what we're dealing with is rage skills and skill damage, 8,000 just isn't kicking it. And if you're increasing squad attack, yes, it's all troops, right? So she can give this buff to infantry and riders, which is great. A 24% attack buff is just not enough to make her hit as hard as we need her to in this meta. Okay. Next, we're increasing range, squad attack by 15% and travel speed by 15%. Both of these are subpar buffs. 15% for your squad attack isn't enough. Travel speed for 15% isn't enough. Okay. She just doesn't do the things that we want her to do enough. Squads have an additional basic attack, have a 10% chance to deal an additional 4,000 damage. It's not bad, but again, I'm not a big fan of this 10% chance. Because that's effectively, if you think about it, basic attacks trigger once per second. So once every 10 seconds, you may do an additional 4,000 damage. To me, that's not enough to give her enough validity in the game. Okay? And then here we have when squad HP is lower than 50%, increases range squad attack by an additional 26%, and the squad travel speed by 18%. So this only triggers when she's losing or when she's at lower HP. Okay? Again, the buffs aren't strong enough. The damage isn't enough. She's a free hero, so if she's all that you have, she's not a bad choice. But just remember, in my opinion, it's better to save because heroes are much more readily available now. So you can get the heroes that you want. So save your upgrading for the heroes that you want, and then just hyper-focus getting them when you can. Now, her bonus passive skill is a nice little bonus, but it is only specific to infantry squads. So increasing damage dealt to infantry squads by a flat 10% is good. But again, it's very one-sided. So the reason why she gets put so far down on the list is because she has no utility. And, you know, the things that she does simply get done better by the other heroes that are available. She is free, like I mentioned. So she is one of the ones that you can awaken entirely for free. So if you have her, great. But just trust me when I tell you that she's got much better options to use. Now, if you have her, who can you suit her with? Well, I mean, anybody. She's got the skills talent tree, right? So she's going to be generating rage that way. So you can put her kind of anywhere, but you want to kind of keep her with the same type of ones that's going to maybe generate more of that rage for her so that she gets more of those triggering. And keep her more of the travel speed. So we had just spoken about Chun, how Chun likes to have that increase that travel speed. So if you're wanting to have a fast march, for example, from your ranged, having Chun and Nakano would be a pretty quick line for them. It'd be one of the faster lines for your range squad. But as always, you're going to pair her with the same two that you're going to see at the top of the list, Julia, Lewis, right? The reason why they're at the top of the list is because they have so much utility. They generate a ton of rage and they do a ton of damage. Those are the kind of heroes that you want. But that being said, guys, that runs through all 8 of the heroes that are currently there with the ranged squad talent tree. This means we have completed part 2 of our 5-part series talking about legendary heroes. That gives us infantry and ranged done. Next, we'll talk about riders, and oh, am I excited for that one. I hope you are too. But in order to get that one, you have to hit that like button. You have to hit that bell button, getting all the notifications when new ones go live. I'll tell you now, I do release them Saturday mornings at 4:20 a.m. So if you're waiting for the next one, it's going to drop on Saturday. But that being said, guys, thanks very much for tuning in. Hit the likes, hit the follows, hit the subscriptions. If you haven't introduced yourself in the chat yet, go ahead and drop it in the comments. If you have any suggestions for future topics you'd like me to cover, go ahead and throw it in the comments. And from there, folks, I bid you adieu. Go ahead and stay lifted.